Good morning, everyone. Firstly, just to say, my thoughts are with the people of Ukraine. It's a real pleasure to be speaking with you here at the SMMT Electrified 2022. Wow, what a year it's been. It's hard to think of a more eventful period in automotive history, perhaps since the horse gave way to the cart. If you don't know me, I'm Andy Palmer. I've 4 decades of experience in the auto industry, including serving as Chief Operating Officer at Nissan, where I was credited with pioneering the world's first mass-market electric vehicle, the Nissan Leaf, and as Chief Executive of Aston Martin, where I led the company to introduce its first SUV, a mid-engine hypercar, and hopefully set it on its journey to an electrified future. Today, I'm the Executive Vice Chairman and CEO of Switch, a carbon-neutral electric bus and van business created on Zoom during lockdown and recently valued at $1.6 billion. In addition to that role, I also serve on the boards of various businesses operating in the net zero transportation space, including Inabat Auto, a European battery manufacturer, Hilo, an electric scooter business, and PodPoint, the EV charging network. Today I'm going to talk to you about why automotive is spearheading the move towards net zero and address the opportunities and the barriers that we'll encounter along the way. Let's start by looking at the climate that we've been operating in the last 12 months. Recovery from a global pandemic, disrupted supply chains, a war in Europe. These macro events have all played their part in impacting our sector. But perhaps the most seismic development has been the unrelenting progress made towards net zero and a near universal demand for a greener planet. What's driven it? Well, we're here in part because of government diktats, in part because of consumer demand, and in part because of genuine initiatives from within the industry. I truly believe that what happens over the coming months and years will shape an entire generation of the automotive sector. If we get it right, the opportunities are limitless, and Britain can regain its spot in the top tier of the global automotive league table. But get it wrong, and our domestic industry risks being disseminated to a point of no return. The factors that will determine our fate are three. The 3 I's: innovation, intervention, and information. Let me address the first, innovation. The scale of innovation over the past 2 years has led to new players entering and even dominating the field, something that hasn't occurred in many decades. And new expectations are being set by the consumer. But if we truly want to lead the way when it comes to achieving net zero, we can't stop just there. I fear the industry is, with the guidance of policymakers, sometimes taking a myopic and narrow approach and putting all of their eggs in one glove box. Let me explain. Electric is great, and it will be the mode of choice for most consumers over the coming decade. In fact, the transition to electric is as inevitable as death and taxes. But if we truly want to advance the net zero agenda, we must empower our scientists and our engineers to find multiple green technologies that reach these environmental objectives. Having spent more than 4 decades in the auto industry, I've seen my fair share of well-intended political meddling having a negative impact on the ultimate objective. And we can go all the way back to the lean burn technologies in the early 1980s. Take diesel as the most high-profile example. In the early 2000s, the UK government provided incentives to motorists to purchase diesel cars. Why? Because they use less fuel than the petrol engine. Therefore, it was believed that diesels were an environmentally friendly alternative. Less than a decade later, and that proves to be the opposite, with diesels producing several times more nitrogen dioxide and particulates than petrol engines, irritating lungs and causing, of course, breathing difficulties. At the crux of the diesel saga, it was politicians overstepping their mark. Instead of identifying the problem, writing the checks and leaving the rest down to the scientists and engineers, they also dictated, fatefully, what they believed to be the solution. Today we face a similar challenge. Many politicians seem blinkered in their belief that electric is the only route for net zero transportation, and that simply isn't true. And as an industry, it's bad business not to have a plan B, a plan C, and a plan D. For example, while battery technology will play a fundamental role in our industry, it's unlikely that it will work in heavy goods vehicles or in tow vehicles. Perhaps hot hydrogen could outperform EV for efficiency given their weight and their distance requirements. Synthetic fuels, vital for air travel, could also provide drama, noise and excitement in the sports car market. And of course, no doubt there will be engineers and scientists whose research will see them stumble upon applications of an environmentally friendly fuel that no one has previously thought possible. In other words, we must avoid the temptation to view electric as the one-size-fits-all approach, which it clearly isn't. And herein lies why many car makers didn't sign up to COP26. So that's innovation. It isn't stopping for anyone, and we certainly shouldn't try to get in its way. Then there's the second I, intervention. Politicians need to avoid a steadfast and, given the circumstances, somewhat foolish commitment to the free market. I believe in the free market. I'm a capitalist. I'm a business person. And I want us to operate in a market without needless intervention or interference. But I'm afraid to report that we're not operating in a global market that possesses those characteristics. The whole net zero segment of the auto industry is being propped up by state-funded actors. In January 2021, the European Union approved 2.9 billion euros in subsidies for 12 member countries to develop a project aimed at boosting the electric battery industry. This followed a 3.2 billion euro plan to support research and innovation announced in December 2019. Across the pond, Joe Biden has made investing in the EV sector one of his top policy priorities and is pumping billions of dollars into it. China, EV supremacy is also built on vast investments from the government. In my sector, 98% of the world's electric buses are in China because of their coordinated government investment. Judging by their track record, that shows no sign of letting up. And while the UK government is investing in the sector, namely through charging infrastructure and a few hundred million here and there for gigafactories and electric buses, it's dwarfed by what we see from competing nations overseas. Those who fear disrupting the level playing field need to take their head out of the sand. As it is, the field is already heavily stacked against us. Put simply, if the United Kingdom does not establish at least 4 gigafactories in the next 5 years, we risk losing our entire auto industry and the 800,000 jobs that go with it. We can't avoid that fate without a mix of public and private sector investment. A failure to act based on the commitments to free market would be principled, but ultimately terminally reckless. What's more, we don't have very long to act before it's too late. Frustratingly, where there is incentive and investment from government, it isn't always deployed in the right way. In my world of electric buses, the government is stimulating the market by regulating procurement that says we no longer want diesel buses, we want electric instead, which is great on the face of it. That's exactly the kind of intervention that will benefit the industry. However, the zebra funding, as it's called, designed to stimulate the industry, is yet to be released and flowing. So we've ended up in a situation where nobody's buying diesel buses or domestic electric buses. What does that lead to? Well, effectively, we have dormant British factories. Good intentions from the government, but by failing to deploy the funding to back up the impressive headlines, we've ended up with the unintended consequences that are hindering British manufacturers in a highly competitive global market. Without wishing to appear glib, the government has two options: get the targeted intervention right or screw up our industry. So, we need investment from politicians, and we need them to define the problem we're trying to solve, but not prescribe the solution. It's then for our designers and our engineers and our scientists to develop the technology, the intellectual property, and environmentally friendly solutions to those problems. The decisions that we take in the coming years will define the next era of human advancement. Getting the economics of batteries and other net zero fuels right is not something that we can do. It's something that we must do. However, doing so is far from certain to happen seamlessly, given the global challenges of the modern world. Today, I truly believe we find ourselves in the fourth iteration of the global revolution, a revolution that started through steam power. We would do well to keep in mind that the fifth iteration might very well be powered by our ability to identify and develop net zero modes of transport. Getting there, however, is not a natural process. Just as we had to push our boundaries in the past, so too we have to push our boundaries in the present and the future. Changing the world takes sweat and hard work. That revolution is underway, but we need to keep going. Why am I so passionate about making sure that that happens? Well, because transport is an innate part of our culture and our society. Society bends to the innovation in transportations. Roads have adapted to vehicle innovation. 3-lane highways, smart motorways, autonomous driving, connected cars, shared Uber mobility. These have all evolved around the technology of cars, buses and bikes that we use every day. Don't expect that to challenge. The relationship between vehicle and society will evolve at a greater pace than in the past, and we've got to keep up with it. An example of that lightning pace of change is the advancement of mobility as a service. In other words, the ability to see an asset like a bus or a van as an operational cost rather than a capital asset, where you buy travel by the kilometre rather than owning the asset outright. That makes access to low carbon more affordable. At least I can say it's true for buses. It is now cheaper to own and run an electric bus over its life than it is to own and run an internal combustion engine equivalent. Countries like India have spotted this opportunity and are leading the way in mass for public transportation right now. But these are the kind of areas where the UK needs to operate if it wants to make serious inroads in the global market. Moving away from a funding model built around high upfront costs seems to me at least like a necessity given the current pressures on the public and private purse. That leads me to the third I, information. We live in a world of misinformation, and it's no more stark than in the description of EV range and EV cleanliness. The reputation of EVs are undermined by range anxiety born out of unreliable expectations. The reputation of EVs will be undermined as the customers discover that not all EVs are born clean, that more CO2 is typically discharged in the construction of an EV than in an internal combustion engine equivalent, and that zero emission cars does not mean net zero. I would therefore utilise this forum to champion the EV equivalent of the Monroby label, a label that discloses in the United States the real world range of the vehicle in urban highway and multi-terrain conditions, both in hot and cold climates. A simple 9-box chart that sets the consumer's expectation. A sticker that discloses the total carbon expended in the production of the vehicle and during its operation, using either sustainable or conventional energy. And a sticker that discloses local content. An EV isn't particularly environmentally friendly if it's shipped around the world or manufactured using a supply chain reliant on air freight. More transparency will lead to furthering confidence in new energy solutions. Better education of the consumer makes the benefits clearer, and of course, it puts pressure on the manufacturers to improve their offer. But it also favours local production, because local production doesn't require long, carbon-intensive supply chains. A consumer or legislative pull based on publicly disclosed information has the potential to balance local production of EVs with local demand. And that's an equation that is massively out of balance in the United Kingdom today. An example, in 2021, for every 10 internal combustion cars sold and registered in the UK, we, the United Kingdom, manufactured 7 of those internal combustion engine vehicles ourselves, even though many of them were exported. However, for every 10 battery electric cars sold in the UK, we only manufacture 4. Put another way, we are unknowingly exporting our jobs to the EU, the US, Korea, Japan and China, rather than using the green revolution to create jobs in the United Kingdom. Give the consumer the information to buy, informed of local content and their impact on the environment. That's what I would urge today. I know I need to wrap up. It's been a pleasure to speak to you today. Yes, I pointed out some of the key challenges government and the industry faces, but please don't misinterpret that as doubting the industry's ability to spearhead the move towards net zero. There is a real sense of excitement about the period right now in the automotive sector. Whatever the circumstances in which we operate, the British auto industry has a proud history of changing and adapting itself, moulding around the demands of governments and the expectations of customers, but always on its own terms. And that's why it is such a vibrant and exciting place to be a part of right now. Unlike other changes that we've had to contend with in the past, the march towards electric and net zero is stopping for no one. But we have to get it right. Thankfully, the auto industry proves to us and comes to us with a rich and varied history that gives us a treasure trove of learnings as we embark upon this next generation. The future is exciting. The future is bright. And with the 3 I's in mind, let's go out and get it. Thank you.